All right. Happy holidays. How are you?
I am doing fantastic, David. Thank you for asking. I know you don't celebrate Thanksgiving where you're at, but
Oh, we do. We just do it earlier in
oh,
October. We get to the turkey first. You guys have all the leftover turkeys.
you mean the in Ottawa on their way to America?
Oh, well, you want to know something that might upset some people that listen to this? The earliest known recordings of Thanksgiving being celebrated in the United States are from the 1600s, but in Canada it goes back to 1586 or something like that. So
Wow.
it may have originated here, but throughout the world, I've been to a lot of different places where different cultures around the world have some kind of harvest oriented celebration, which is
Uh,
what effectively what Thanksgiving is, right?
I suspect that is the case.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what would you like to talk about today?
Sure. Well, David, my name is Harry Lipnan Jr. I am a recovering banker. I've been in the business for about 15 years, all in the business banking and commercial banking components of the industry. So I've worked with small business owners, medium-sized business owners, and what has resonated with me throughout that time is the amount of success a lot of these business owners have
Okay.
in spite of having the most faulty financial systems and operations in place. It's one of those ninth wonder of the world. Uh,
Okay.
I never figured it out. Maybe I'll write a book about it in retirement. But
So you've seen this from from the banker's seat, and you've decided that you want to get into business. So we're going to talk today about a business that you are thinking about acquiring. Is that right?
that is correct. I figured if they could do it and not have a balance sheet that balanced, imagine what I could do.
There you go. So what have you found? What did you want to discuss?
Well, this particular business, I found I've been in the self-search mode for about 2 years.
Hmm.
This particular one is in the B to G space, business to government. And what this company does, it provides program management and administrative support based on a contract that they have with various federal government agencies. Now,
Okay.
I'm very familiar with this type of business here in the U.S. That is a big business to be doing business with the federal government, and the federal government buys everything from apples to zebras, believe it or
Hmm.
not, everything within that spectrum.
Yep.
And what they do is they put out solicitations, RFPs, and businesses that provide apples and zebras, they can submit their quote, so to speak. And if they fit, then they have a typically, a 5 year contract. And then it gets measured and make sure you're doing what you said you were going to do. And this particular one has been around for about 11 years. They provide administrative support to four federal government agencies.
Okay.
And that means what they do is if a particular agency needs admin support, maybe for a project, but they only need it for a certain amount of time, this company will provide that labor for them.
Okay. So it's a temporary staffing type of situation.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe what they do. In addition to that, should one of these agencies that's under the contract require maybe IT services or someone with IT experience to resolve maybe a particular project or issue, uh, this company would provide that to them. Uh, bit, go
Okay.
ahead.
So how much interaction have you had with the seller? Have you met the seller yet?
No, I have not. I discovered this. Actually, it was an email sent to me. I was most likely on some sort of distribution list I had signed up before. And this particular M&A advising firm out of New York sent it to me. I completed the NDA and received the financials. So they're doing about 3.2 or 3.6 million. I don't have it up, but I think I had shared it with you.
Okay.
and they give the last 3 years. They're asking 2.6 million. All their employees are remote, so which is perfect because they don't have to have a physical location to house anyone. Because what happens is, as they get an order for services, they just dispatch who they have on call to that particular location. It could be anywhere in the US.
Okay. And,
And
and do you know what the cash flow was?
uh, 717 was the most recent cash flow.
Okay. 717. So they're looking for 3.5 times. Is that an SDE or an EBITDA?
That is correct. That is correct.
It's
Which,
SDE.
yeah, it was based on SDE. Yes.
Okay, so that's 3 times SDE. So we're because you haven't spoken to the owner yet. Here would be some of my big questions right off the top.
Okay.
Number one, yes, they work for the federal government, but you said there's 4 different agencies. So I would want to know, is that really 4 different customers? Is there a different contract RFP process, tendering process for each of those contracts? Because if there is, I would consider that 4 customers rather than 1 customer. But if there's one sort of supply and service department process that brought that contract in for all 4 of those departments, then I would consider it 1 customer.
Right.
Okay. So that would be one of the things that I'd want to know is like, what is this relationship? And so if it is 4 different contracts and 4 different processes and 4 different expiry dates of these contracts, I would want to know if they terminate at the same time or if they terminate at different times. That would be another key thing that I would want to know. And you talk about the level of business that they're doing. Have you seen any kind of monthly breakdown or annual breakdown? Is it pretty consistent over the last few years?
No, I have not seen that. What I received was that a spreadsheet with cash flow and their profit and loss. The marketing piece, even though well written and included some information, it opened up for a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately for me, I am somewhat very familiar with this type of business because one part of my career was I worked for the Small Business Development Center, which is an SBA sponsored, supported program here in the US.
Yeah.
Helps provide counseling and consulting to would-be business owners and existing business owners. And part of that was helping small businesses do business with the federal government. And one of my colleagues, and while I was employed with them, he was a former federal government contractor. And he was, in charge of helping companies do that. So I learned a lot from them. The big takeaway is these contracts, as you mentioned, are for a specific time frame. And what the risk is you may, when it comes up for renewal, you may not be the person to select renewal. Not that you have to rebid, but based on performance, the agency might decide, okay, we want to put it out again. Or worse, the government decides to shut down and puts a pause on everything, which happens. If I was doing business with the National Park Service, I would be in trouble.
Yeah.
They'd always be the one that shut down.
Yeah, I guess they're the one that they feel is the least absolutely necessary, I think, right?
It is. But tell that to an avid camper in Yosemite. They when the park's closed. But
So
so that's one risk factor. The other one is the program component. So the federal government likes to see stuff in a very specific format, in a very specific way. And what I learned from my time with my colleague is if you don't deliver it, if they want it on yellow paper, you got to put it on yellow paper,
yeah,
or you're going to get paid.
yeah.
That's
Well, the other thing that so we're talking about a business, and let's say it has 4 customers, and this is something you'd have to check in your due diligence. You want to know if there's any seasonality at all to this cash flow. But let's assume it's a pretty regular level of demand across time. And let's assume that we have 4 different contract end dates. Okay. For the sake of this conversation. Yeah. What um, you would want to do, I mean, basically, is you'd have to look at what amount of cash flow reasonably would you have access to before those contract renewal dates come up. Because the amount of money that I would feel comfortable for the seller to receive is going to be tied to the amount of money I know I can make with the contracts in place. Because
Okay,
when you buy this business, you are buying those 4 contracts. That's
right.
what you're buying, right? And we know that the government pays its bills, right? So I mean, there's no collection risk. It's a very attractive customer, and that's probably why these people are pricing it at 3 times STE, which is a little high for a service business, but I can see why that would be. But the next thing is, what else are you going to have to pay? So this is being offered as an asset sale, I'm guessing, or is it a share sale?
No, asset sale.
Asset sale. And
Yeah.
are they transferring any receivables to you, or is
Yeah.
it they
Yes,
are?
yes, they are, and working capital. I didn't have all the information pulled up. I wasn't sure how we were gonna, you know, conduct a meeting, but it wasn't there.
Okay.
Yeah, there is in-house counsel, and so the biggest component of expense is personnel. That's what this is about. It
Yep.
is based in New York. The seller is based in New York, and they do lease a 200 square foot office space. It's probably just a place to collect mail and run the business.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking it's going to be. I can move that to Texas or move that to Florida or anywhere. I don't think I need to be in New York.
Okay. So
But
the operating capital component was going to be the thing that I was going to bring up, because oftentimes a business will be offered for sale as an asset sale, and the seller will want to keep all of their cash and receivables, etc. And for something like this, we don't know the terms of the contract, but in general, employees are paid every 2 weeks, for example. But then under the contract, you might be invoicing the government at the end of the month for the work that happened that month. Then it
correct.
might take 30 or it could take 30 or 45 days to get paid.
Correct.
So you might have to be in a position where you're constantly financing 3 or 4 or 5 payrolls before cash comes in.
That is correct. That is correct. I'm familiar with that. I've known some customers that's exactly what they had to do, and they were selling widgets. So
Yeah.
it really didn't matter. But what I have learned is, I guess being on the inside gives me a little bit of a competitive advantage for this type of business. Is that there are developing the relationship with the program officer at the agency is key. Having that open communication, always making sure to be responsive, gets you pushed to the front of the line, so to speak, when there's like payment issues of concern. They're more receptive, like anything else.
Yeah.
And being flexible in how you receive payment is also very critical. So taking a credit card or accepting wires, all those different types of things really help in making this successful. But to your point, David, I think what would concern me, in addition to what you said, when are these contracts renewing? And if they are, and how much is WIP, how much is work in progress, is the sustainability. Meaning, is this something that the federal government would always put out for RFP?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and so here's what the deal structure would ultimately look like as far as I'm concerned. And there's lots of precedent for this. Like even in the world of real estate, I personally know of a transaction where someone sold a strip mall, and part of the deal was that there was a seller note that was contingent upon one of the big tenants renewing their lease 2 years after the transaction. So the seller was owed this extra money, and they had to wait 2 years to make sure that tenant renewed their lease before they got that money. And so it would be the same kind of format that I would suggest for this deal. So you'd have to create, for example, a 10-year cash flow forecast, and you would have to look at when the end dates of the 4 contracts were, and you would have to look at that as a business unto itself. So you're going to evaluate the business as a going concern going off into the future, and then evaluate just what is it worth to me if none of these contracts renew. So let's say you agree with the seller's price of 2.6 million. Okay. But when you examine the remaining term of the current contracts, you say, if I bought this business and this is all I got, I would only be willing to pay 1.3 million for it, half that amount. So what you would have to do is you'd have to make an offer for 2.6, but you would say, I'm only going to give you 50% of that on closing day, the 1.3. And then I would actually structure the balance not as a single seller note, but as 4 individual seller notes. And so each of those seller notes would only become payable at a point in the future if
I think we
that
have a
particular contract. Sorry,
connection.
did I bump on you there? Can you hear me?
Okay, now I hear you.
Okay. So we would have 4 different seller notes, each note tied to a specific contract. And so if one of those 4 contracts doesn't get renewed, that particular note would not be payable. Because when you buy this business, all you're buying is those 4 contracts,
That is correct. Yeah,
right? And so if they don't renew, you don't have a business,
right.
right? I mean, you could say, I'm in the staffing business. I could go find other customers, but really that's a whole different business. A big part of the performance of this particular enterprise, I'm going to bet, is the fact that they don't have any marketing or sales.
I'm sorry, they don't have,
Marketing or sales,
right, yeah.
you know?
All they do is respond to RFPs on the federal government website.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
so they're just serving these customers, whereas a regular temporary staffing agency that you might have in any other city, they're constantly trying to find customers and taking people out to lunch or making sales calls and all that kind of stuff, and that has an expense to it, and that's not in this business.
yeah. And there was something I read in the marketing package, the offer memorandum. There is a small component of non-government business, very small, which is what they identified as an opportunity for growth.
Hmm.
And the technology component of their business is also small and cited as an opportunity to grow. So right now, the core service is really personnel for administrative functions. So being able to, I guess, broaden the scope of services might be the way to grow this business.
Yeah, I mean, that would always be the case, right? Like getting new customers, of course.
You
The
got freeze frame again.
Oh, sorry. You know, are you plugged into the internet or are you on Wi-Fi?
Okay. No, I'm not on Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
The finding new customers, of course, is a way that you can grow a business, right?
Right.
And if they're going to present it that way, as there's all kinds of
Right.
blue ocean opportunity here for someone to find new customers and grow it in different ways. But of that revenue, that 3.6 million in revenue, how much of it is Uncle Sam?
Probably all 90% of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what this business is. It's by far it's just this government contract stuff.
Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's a customer concentration play. Um, who ideally is the buyer for this? It would be, someone who is much bigger,
Yeah,
who,
connection issues again.
am I back?
You're back.
Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on. Ideally, the buyer for this is a much bigger enterprise who can absorb that kind of customer concentration risk. When it comes to what I call a financial buyer, an individual who needs an income, like yourself, like this is going to be your thing, it becomes more difficult because it has to work, and all 4 of these contracts have to renew in order for this deal to make sense for you long term, right? And so the challenge you're going to have is if you negotiate for this and you put in what is a reasonable offer that mitigates your risk in these contracts failing to renew, I mean, the seller could say, well, I don't want to live with all that risk. I don't want to bear the risk of this guy not running the business well and the contracts being terminated. And so they may not want to do that deal. It's going to come down to a question of just how motivated the seller is. Um, and and what other opportunities there might be. Like that's the so for this, what I would do, honestly, is I would get the offer up there right front and center to begin with before you spend much time on this. Because you want to see if they're going to have any kind of appetite for the sort of deal that is going to work for you. And if
Okay.
they're not, then you don't want to spend any time working on it.
So if I heard correctly, then the next step in this scenario is first have a meeting with the seller,
Yeah.
have my questions prepared, and then after that, submit an LOI with something close to the. I don't think 2.6 is pretty aggressive even for
It's
this.
high. It's
Yeah.
high. Yeah.
So I was thinking, based on the cash flow, and I'm going to assume it's correct, it's accurate. I was thinking maybe 2 times SDE.
Yeah. So I would probably say that a little bit more than that is probably reasonable, but a first offer of 2 times SDE is probably good for a first offer, with the understanding they're going to counter it with something else. But I would put in that offer that you want a large degree of seller financing based on the termination dates of the contracts, and that the seller financing will be in 4 different notes, each tied to one of those 4 contracts. And the size of the notes will be based on the magnitude of the contracts, and they will only be payable if those contracts are renewed. And so what you're doing is you're laying out, this is what I'm going to be asking you to do because this is the only way I can mitigate the risk in this deal. And then you have to wait for them to come back and say yes or no. And, when you have that conversation with them, that would be a point where I would say you want to ask for what the expiration dates are of these contracts. So if they've all recently been renewed, that's a completely different story than if they're all expiring in the next 18 months.
Right, that's correct. Which would be part of that meeting with the seller and the seller's broker, having those questions, asking about, elaborating a little bit about the contracts, start dates, end dates, that sort of thing.
I'm surprised the broker didn't put this into the sim
No, it wasn't.
because this is such a fundamentally huge aspect of this business. Um, every buyer that looks at this is going to want to have a conversation about that.
So that was my next step. I wanted to get, your insights and your guidance prior to putting my 10 questions together for the meeting. So that's definitely on the top of the list. The
So as far as thinking about those questions for the meeting, I would be thinking along these lines. I would be thinking about the process of contract renewal. I would want to know the story of how they originally got the contracts, how many times the contracts have been renewed. I would want to know who they deal with in each of those departments, and for how many of those renewals have they dealt with the same person, right? So you know, their customer, the department of X, right? That's not really a customer. A customer is a person, right? And you have a relationship with a person. So I would want to know about the stability of those counterparties in those different organizations, right? Just how well is this company known? Um, you want to know how they got them originally, what the process looks like for renewal, how early in the game do you start sort of the talks about the contract? I would want to know about the pricing power. How is it determined what the rates are? Was it a tendered price? And is the government obligated to retender the contract after 5 years? I mean, obviously the incumbent has an advantage if there's been no failure in delivery, right? Because of switching costs. And the government purchasers know that. But But if they're obligated to put it out to tender every year, then there's all kinds of things that could happen. I'll give you a quick example. Um, in the garbage business, I've seen people approach other garbage companies and say, we want to buy you, like smaller independent ones. And then they'll come in and they'll do a little bit of due diligence and investigation. And then it'll come time to bid for maybe some rural garbage routes or something like that. And the bigger garbage company will basically undercut all the bids because of information they gathered during the examination of the smaller company. And that's totally not fair. And it's totally bully kind of action. But, what is the small guy to do? Like pay 50 grand for a lawyer's retainer and like try to sue them or something, right? But oftentimes these contracts are a matter of public record. So when you have like a sealed tender process where people make bids and then some purchasing agent opens the bids and people can come in, it's probably all online now, but in the good old days, you could come at a certain time and watch them open the bids and they would read them out. Like this is from this company, and this is what they bid. And so if there's another company out there that wants this business and they went to the last tendering process and they know what the winning bid was from this company, they could come next time and just undercut it by 20%,
That's correct. Yes,
you
that.
know?
You're right. These are public. It's public information, so that is correct. That'd be something. And you're on freeze frame again.
Oh, sorry. Not sure what's wrong. You're moving okay on my screen.
Yeah, but you're freeze framing on ever so often.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, I don't know what the issue might be, but so the last thing I heard you say was something about undercutting and also the being having access to that information, but I didn't get the gist of it. Like how were people?
Oh, so just the threat is that if there's someone gunning for this contract, if there's a corporate enemy out there, who really, really, really wants to get this contract for one reason or another, and they're big enough to afford maybe even to do it at a loss, they could do that just to get it away from you. And that was the example of these garbage companies, is not so much that they wanted to um, get those rural garbage routes, but they just wanted to take the revenue away from the independent guy, to weaken him to the point where his business was going to be probably not viable. And then they were hoping that he would just go under and they would just inherit all of his other business if he closed down, right? And so it was really underhanded, sneaky, bully kind of tactic. But that happens sometimes in the world of business. That's just another scary thing to me about a business that has all of its work from this kind of thing. Like if this was a staffing service that had hundreds of private companies as clients and one government contract that represented 25% of its revenue, we would still be having this kind of customer concentration discussion. And we would be talking about how risky it is to buy that business with this one big contract. Well, this is the same thing times four.
Right. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
even riskier.
That is all very valid points. You did share something that I totally did not take into account, and that is having access to the bid, the proposal that was submitted, and how they won, so that if somebody else wants it, you're right. I This seller might be in that. They always say retirement, but it could be some headwinds. And that's why, possible recession, possible government slowdown on spending. These are probably all headwinds that might be predicating this sale. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we know that if you can make a deal and and there's and you can mitigate the risk by having seller notes that don't have to be paid if the contracts aren't renewed, you can manage the risk in this one. The question is going to be if the seller is open to that. And the seller is likely only going to be open to that if they really believe in you and your ability to run the business. they're also only going to be open to that if they actually think that the contracts are likely to be renewed and that they're going to collect all their money. And so this kind of offer is also a test. Just how much confidence does the seller have in this thing? And if they immediately flat out say, no, we're never going to do that, you got to go, Harry, you got to go get a 90% SBA loan and you got to pay me all on closing day. Well, then to me, that's a bit of information about what they think about the future.
Correct. That's an excellent point, David. Thanks for sharing that. Because that was going to be one of my questions. How do I mitigate the risk of the renewals or non-renewals of these contracts? And that's exactly it right there. The seller note, a big seller note, carry back, so to speak, and the offer, the way I present the offer.
Well, yeah, and the seller carry note has to be in four pieces. So there's no rule that says you can only have one seller note.
Right.
So I've had plenty of deals before where there's been more than one seller note and different conditions on each one.
But I do need to find out first if they are really four separate RFPs or just,
Right.
I mean, this would be the first thing to determine before presenting the offer, correct?
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know how this is structured. Like
Yeah,
I don't know if there's sort of a central government purchasing agency that created one contract that covers these four groups. I don't know.
freeze again.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. But I've been on Zoom all day and it's been working great. It's just we're having trouble right now. Excuse me. Yeah, so as I was saying, we don't know if there's some kind of central purchasing agency that created one contract for all four departments.
Right, okay. Now, in this particular scenario, this type of business and the way this is structured, I think it's one of the easier ones to vet compared to all the others I've looked at. And there haven't been a lot, I'd probably say half a dozen or so I've looked at. Deal flow is always the most arduous component of being a self-searcher in this ETA world. But on this one, I'm pretty confident I can vet it, after getting my questions and after having that first meeting, that will determine, how I proceed from there.
Yeah. Um, well, it's going to be easy to verify the history, right? Because you're going to have all the just the payments from the government. I mean, due diligence on sales is going to be simple here.
Right.
Um, the second part of this is going to be the labor. So labor has been a challenge for a lot of industries. And so I would be interested to know from the seller what their labor situation has been like, if they've had a hard time finding enough people, and what they've been doing around that.
From what I read in the sim, the I'm going to guess more of the higher cost components of the labor is who they have on staff, that in-house counsel that serves also as the HR person. And I presume they're also reviewing the contract. I don't, it wasn't clear from the sim whether or not there's two owners. So the sim was not identifying if maybe one of the owners is that in-house counsel. And I recall that one of the owners is willing to stay on and be employed in the business as an option. So those all raised more questions for me when I was reading that. So I'll have to find that out as it relates to labor.
Was there was there a labor adjustment in the calculation of SDE for the second owner?
Just one owner adjustment. Yeah.
Okay.
And back to the labor component, it's all admin. So it's not high skill, it's not low skill. I presume the labor component, my assessment is it wouldn't be that difficult to recruit that type of labor.
Okay. And you said it's all remote?
All remote. So for example, this is what I just know from having access to the inside. let's say the Department of Defense, their naval operation in California, it's the holidays, their staff is leaving, but they need someone there to cover incoming mail and that, whatever the case is. They may ask for someone for 2 or 3 weeks. So one of their employees might be in California and they'll just have that person, you know,
Oh,
but
okay. So the employees show up to work in person.
correct as required.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you meant the administrative support was being done in a remote fashion, like people were working from home.
Oh, no, just no. The remote is their employees. They're not coming to any physical, they're just going to the place where the work will be done, whether it be a naval base, an Air Force base, a government bill, whatever the case might be.
Okay. So so then labor is going to be an issue because in some places in the country, labor is really tight. And so you give the example of California, like if there's a Navy base in San Diego, for example,
Right.
um, what if they can't find the right person? Like, what then happens? I don't know. Like this would be a question I would ask the seller.
Right.
Like what if none of the people on your list in San Diego are willing to work over Christmas or something like that? Like, do you take someone from LA? Do you pay them to drive every day? Like, like what happens? How do you manage that? I would want to know that kind of stuff about this business.
That's also a good point. I've got to put that on my list of questions. Yeah. Which I presume they're going to be prepared. That, I mean, most an astute buyer will have those questions because they're working with David. They would know the right questions to ask.
Well, you want to think in whenever I talk to people about questions to ask during a seller meeting, you always think about either the flow of money or the flow of the service or product. So the flow of the service or product might be, where do we buy the goods, that for our manufacturing business, or where do we find the employees or the people to do this service? And then how do we train them or get them ready to do it? And then how do we make sure that we bill the clients, and how do we find the clients? And so you're kind of following the flow of the process, or you follow the flow of the money. So how do you make the sale? Where does the customer come from? How do you meet the customer? Where are the leads, right? In most businesses. And then, how do you then convert that lead into a sale? Who does it? Is it an agent? Is it a dealer? Is it a salesperson on your staff? And then you follow this through the process until you submit an invoice to the customer and you get paid. And you just ask questions about each piece along that path. And that way you kind of gain an understanding of what goes on in the business.
Makes sense. Makes absolute sense. And that model can be applied to any business, not just this one. It's
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, put it conceptually speaking, just the framework in which to evaluate the the seller buyer call.
Well, and it gives a lot of
Another freeze
opportunity.
frame.
Oh, sorry. My throat is freeze framing too. Um,
Okay.
my throat is freezing up too.
Okay.
So so the whole point of that linear pathway of conversation is because as the person is explaining this stuff, almost invariably it's going to open the door to another question. They're going to
Correct.
say something interesting and you're going to ask about that, and you're going to end up on these threads that lead away from that main line. And so when you end up at the end of a tangent, there can be an expectation or a feeling like, oh, now we're finished talking about that. And by having that main line of questioning in mind, or even planned out on paper, you can draw it out. When you reach the end of the tangent, you then remember, you can know where to go back on the main line of questioning. Because whenever I meet someone who's had some kind of trouble during an acquisition, and we start talking about what went wrong in the business, oftentimes it's something very fundamental. And I'll say, did you never think to talk to them about that? And when the buyer thinks back about it, they'll be like, yeah, you know what? I thought about those things and I had questions about those things, but I don't think I ever got to talk to them about it. And it's so what typically ended up happening is they got just off track. The questioning got off track, and then it went out of mind. And then they were focused on other things that they were excited about, typically, because buyers get excited about the business, right? They get excited about thinking about the business, about what it's going to be like, all the money they're going to make. And that's all part of that whole buyer fever thing of, people getting overexcited and maybe making a mistake. But if you plan out your questioning, even by drawing it, like if you were to draw what you imagine is their process and then use that as the basis of questioning, uh, you will likely have incorrect things in your idea. But that's okay, because it's going to keep you on track, and then you're going to ask all these questions and get the answers that will fill in the lack of detail that you have about what's going on there.
So what I've gathered then is the best process to follow here is to put a framework together and stage the questioning based on what's called order to cash, meaning the order, their customer places an order, walk me through until you collect payment.
Yeah, or even before. Well, in this business, yes, order to cash. In any other business out there, you would want to go prior to the order. Like, how did you get the customer? How did you get the lead? How do you do your marketing, right? To
Right.
just to understand that funnel of people coming in. In this case, yeah, from the moment someone in one of these government departments understands we need a person for 3 weeks, how does this happen? What is the process?
Okay, got it. So yes, because what I'm trying to do is conceptualize how I'm going to structure my questions.
Mhm.
Because the first meeting, you know how it goes. There's a lot of it's like getting to know you. It's that first date. You don't want to be too intrusive. You may ask questions that they may not be willing to, answer or disclose information on. So it's kind of like I like to ask open-ended questions. One of the first questions I ask is, tell me what it's like in a day and a life of being the owner of this business. When you get into that type of rudimentary things and build them.
Well, and that's a great question. Not to overcomplicate this, but the other thing you want to be thinking
Get a freeze
too.
frame again.
Yeah, sorry, it's Thursday afternoon. It's not Friday afternoon. If you expect the internet to fail, it's always should be on a Friday afternoon when everyone's gone home early, right? So,
Not
so
to,
the
that was the last thing I heard, not to overcomplicate this.
okay, so not to overcomplicate the line of questioning, but um, the other thing you want to have in mind when you're doing this conversation with the seller is you also, in a way, want to treat it like a job interview. So when the seller talks to you about something and it relates in some way to something in your own management or business background, and you can then add to a story, oh, that reminds me of when I used to do this and I had this problem, and this is what we used to do to manage it. What you're doing is you're actually demonstrating to the seller that you are going to be a capable and qualified manager of this business. You want them to leave the meeting thinking, wow, this person's really organized. They understood what to ask me. They know how to learn about something new, and they seem like they're really qualified as a potential successor to me. And they're going to have to be convinced that you're going to be a capable manager in order for them to accept the offer that we discussed.
Understood. Okay, that's something I never thought about. That's a great point. So it's almost I have to be selling myself,
Yeah.
position myself in as a likely candidate for taking their business over, which they probably grew from scratch. I mean, I'm just going to presume they started from, zero. So
Yeah, well, and that's what often one of the first questions is, how did you come to be the owner of this business? Tell me the story, right? Um, which is usually in the sim. So let me ask you this. What's your impression of the broker?
Well, it's all been done email. I haven't spoken to the broker I just responded to the email they sent. It's an auto-generated NDA, electronically signed, and then the financials come your way. And it's just a spreadsheet. I don't even have, quality financial. It's just whatever they put on a spreadsheet that came from financial. They put a little statement saying came from financials.
So there's no like package with verbiage and story or anything like that.
It's the sim and the breakdown of the SCE and the financials. That's it.
Okay. So by sim, you just mean this Excel spreadsheet.
Well, no, that came after I signed the NDA. The sim is what came in the email. A little bit about the business, the history, 3 years. I don't know if you can act. Let me see. Let me bring it up.
Well, no, I don't think we should look at it or show it or anything like that because it is a business. We should honor
Okay.
their confidentiality. But SIM stands for confidential information memorandum. We also use business profile, and typically a good one is 30 to 50 pages,
Oh no, not this
and
was
and it's like pictures and write-ups and the history and how it got started and major events in the timeline of the company and opportunities are like quantified. It's like you mentioned the private clients. Well, it would have like we signed our first private client 4 years ago, and every year we've grown this sector by 20%. We can see this growing into the future. Like it's a lot of information. um, when I was when I was doing this, and I'd still make business profiles for clients today that want help with selling their businesses. The guiding light is supposed to be this: that business profile or SIM should have enough information in it that a buyer can read it and feel confident in buying a plane ticket to come and visit the business and meet the seller. Like they should be able to learn enough about the business in that sim or business profile that they have so many of their questions answered that they can imagine themselves in the business and really understand what's going on there. And, all the time I meet buyers who are getting like photocopies of PDFs, of, 3 years of financial statements with things scribbled on the side of them and stuff. And it's like, that's it. That's the package.
yeah.
And, so given the fact that this is what you received, that speaks volumes about the broker that's involved in this deal because they have not invested any effort at all in, packaging this up to properly be presented to people. So, so this can be an issue because if the broker is not an experienced person, like an experienced broker would probably have pointed out this whole contract renewal risk immediately to this client and said, like, here's the biggest problem with your business. And here's what you can expect from buyers. They're going to have a hard time paying you for this business unless there's some kind of guarantee that these contracts get renewed. And that would set the table for them to expect an offer that has some kind of contingencies. If they haven't been prepared in that way, if the broker simply said, oh, here's your cash flow, let's multiply it by 3, that's the asking price, right? Then they could be in the frame of mind that it's like they're selling a house, that they should get an offer and that they're going to get a check on closing day, which is not realistic for this. And so it can be an issue. Um, the,
Something I think you're right. It was not a well prepared sim. And what you just shared with me, David, leads me to think that perhaps there's something worse. There could be brokers out there trying to put a list of potential buyers together, and they could put these, mock or fake listings up to get, capture information. I don't know.
well, you know what? When I started in business brokerage, I signed up with a major franchise brand. And what they told me to do was for the first dozen or so business owners that I met, they said it doesn't really matter how good the business looks. You take the listing because you need something to put on your website. And those things on your website, no matter how terrible they are going to attract some inquiries. And those are going to put people on your email list. And once you get people on your email list, like if you get 100 buyers or 200 buyers, you then leverage that to get better businesses for sale. Because then you can start to say to people, I can sell your business because I have a list of 200 buyers. And it was at that point I was supposed to get more picky with who I listed and what the prices were and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, there are people out there, of course, that would want to collect emails from of people that are interested in buying a business. Um, you know, I've never really spent much time thinking about someone with a nefarious intent trying to do that, but they could. I mean, hey, if I was a identity thief, pretending to be a business broker might be an easy way to gather information about people.
That is true. That's true. And it's kind of, you just described what I feel about Biz by Sell. I think it's just a big database collection mechanism. There's stuff I actually have spotted a fake listing, and I because I in this particular business I was already exploring, and I knew it had sold, and it was still posting. And after I called the broker out on it, not too long after, it was no longer there.
Yeah. And so again, is it some kind of nefarious plan on the part of the broker to get inquiries? I don't know. I honestly believe that there's a lot of people in the brokerage industry who just aren't well enough organized to get a listing down after it's been sold.
Yeah.
Um, they just don't have the processes in place to make sure that happens. Um, I've had many buyers say to me that they'll find a listing online, then they'll go to that broker's own proprietary website and it's not there. And if they call a phone number, for example, and say, I'm inquiring on this business, the person that answers the phone will say, oh, well, that's not listed anymore. Like, but it's still on the big website.
Right, that is correct.
Yeah.
Now, when you were describing the framework of the process for having that dialogue with the seller, can is it something it can be applied to any business, right? I mean, there's going to be some nuances just depending on the industry.
Hmm.
Because it probably would be a challenge for me to educate myself on almost every industry or business that I want to look at. But is there some generic basic knowledge things that the buyer should become aware of prior to having the call? Like,
Yeah. Like, you can do some quick Googling to learn about an industry. So, if you were to put something into Google, like, how do I run a temporary staffing agency?
okay,
You
got
would find some articles that have been published somewhere that wouldn't be too long to read. Most industries have some directed media or concentrated media out there. Like, I know that there are podcasts for businesses where guys are carpenters or roofers or like all kinds of different trades, and individual industry segments have their own media out there now. And so if you're just kind of like looking at this on the surface, if you don't really know a whole lot about it, one of the best bits of information that you can look at is RMA data, Risk Management Associates. And it's an expensive subscription database, but many big city libraries or university libraries have subscriptions to it. And so if you're near a big city library, and sometimes you just have to get a membership card that you can get online even, and then you can get access to an online portal of their reference databases, and RMA is often one of them. And what you can find in there is you can find industries by SIC code, and you can find that RMA will take, like, I think it's IRS data that they get in aggregate, and they are able to sort it out by industry and in industry quartile. And if you can't access it, the Industry Canada has this openly available publicly online, where you can go to Industry Canada and look for industry reports. And they use NAICS codes, which is it's similar to SIC code. It's just a different thing. But you can find an industry, and then you can see the bottom quartile, the two middle quartiles, and the top quartile, and it'll give you the average revenue, cost of goods sold, what they spend on marketing, what they spend on salaries, major expense categories. And you can look at the report both in dollars, average dollars, and by percentage. So with that data, you can then compare with this business that you have the numbers for and you can see where it would fall in temporary staffing agencies. Would it be in a top quartile or the middle? Like, where would it fall, and where are the variations? And so my guess would be that in marketing and sales, this company would have a lower expense than your typical, private temporary staffing agency that's out there trying to win business from other businesses.
Okay. Yeah, that makes absolute. And in fact, I did something similar to that. I didn't get into the RMA component, but I went on YouTube. There was another business in the insurance industry I was looking at, and found a lot of YouTubes on it. And you're right, there's a lot of people out there that market themselves as experts in this industry, that industry. So I did do that. Yeah.
You know, to me, LinkedIn is a great one. Even Facebook. Like, if you get into this deal, if you start negotiating and you have an offer going back and forth and you get into due diligence, I would go looking for somebody that used to manage or run a temporary staffing agency, and hire them as a consultant so that you can have some chats about the industry and about this company in particular, and what they think about different things that you uncover in your due diligence, because nothing beats
Yeah.
experience. Like,
Freeze frame again.
sorry, nothing beats experience. You know what somebody with 15 or 20 years experience is going to be able to decipher in a few minutes is going to be so much more efficient than what you are going to have to figure out while you learn on this learning curve about this new industry to you.
Yeah. And I do know some people here in temporary staffing that they support the manufacturing industry. So I think I'm going to take them to lunch and have a conversation and get their thoughts on how it works. As I understand it, it is a very competitive business.
Mm-hmm.
Both because there's two sides to the staffing business. There's recruiting people to work, and then finding clients to then provide their services to. So
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of different flavors in this industry too, because some temporary staffing businesses are also recruiting businesses, and a lot of them focus on particular industries. I know a fellow who manages a temporary staffing agency, and it's all about warehouse and truck unloading and that kind of stuff. And it's very different from a staffing agency that might be doing medical people, right? And
yeah,
and they're kind of like in different worlds, and it has to do with the employee base, right? Because if they have a pool of workers, it's like, how can we stretch the skills of these people? Who can we serve out there? And if you get too dissimilar in your client base of people you're trying to serve, then it becomes unmanageable, I think, with the employee pool. Because ideally, even though someone signs up with a temporary staffing agency to work, a lot of people want to work as much as possible a full-time schedule. So if they're going 2 weeks to one place and then a week to another place and a week to another place, that's good because they're working every week. I would think it would be a challenge if someone was in the labor pool for this business and they were only working, being called upon a few times a year, or a few days a month. That would be a challenge to keep people.
yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
But this, I like the framework you provided for me to explore just not this business but any business. I guess deal flow. I don't know if that's a topic of conversation that comes up. That the challenges with getting deal flow, and other than going to Biz by Sale or signing up with all these different sites.
So you know what? We're at the end of our hour, but 2 days ago I spent an hour talking with someone just about that. So
Oh,
within the holiday chat calls this year, there's got a great conversation on that topic.
awesome. Well, I look forward to that, David.
Yeah. Awesome, Harry. Thanks so much for calling in. It's great to talk with you.
Thank you, David, and you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk again soon.
I will. I'm going to go kick my router, but I should have a good day. Talk to you later. Happy holidays.
You too.
Bye.